Hello and welcome to the esteemed audiences. We are here again on the second day of the International Conference on Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. As you witnessed in yesterday's program, we had the presentation of Dr. Ali Reza Abedini, head of the Yasin think tank from Iran, Dr. Ibrahim As-Siraj, head of the Association for the Defense of Journalists' Rights from Iraq, Professor Lorenzo Maria Pacini, University professor and representative of Unidolomiti University from Italy, Mrs. Maria, and Mr. Mohammad Pulavan, an international relations expert from the TerrorSpring Institute from Iran. On the second day, we have valuable speakers from different countries. His names will be as follows. Dr. Sayyid Mohammad Javad Hashminejad, Secretary General of Habilian Foundation. Mr. Yaqub Meraji, a separate member of the terrorist group of MEK, and one of the eyewitnesses of the killing of the terrorist group in Operation Morvarid from France. Mr. Daniel Perra, journalist and analyst of geopolitical issues from Italy. And Dr. Robert Fontaine, a university professor, writer, and reporter from Canada. The first speaker on the second day of the International Conference of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK, Habilian Foundation, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you.
Of terrorism. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent and the Merciful. Ladies and gentlemen, dear invitees, I am very happy to be present at a conference that honors the memory of the victims of terrorism in the country of our friend, brother and neighbor Iraq. During the last 2 decades, Iraq has been one of the biggest victims of terrorism in the world. After the arrival of the occupying forces and foreigners, Iraq, which in addition to however, the history of the presence of destructive and terrorist groups is not exclusively related to this period. Although brutal terrorism was prominent in this period, during the previous regime, the dissolved basis part of support to them. The terrorist group of the MEK is a group that, when it is mentioned, reminds of murder and deception and betrayal against the nations of Iran and Iraq. The MEK, who were officially present in Iraq since 1986, acted as a part of the military and security arm of the Ba'ath nearly 2 decades of their evil presence in Iraq. They used the financial facilities that were the right of their goals and the Iraqi dictator. Saddam had provided them with 15 military bases, with full facilities, monthly salaries, and oil quota. During the Intifada of 1991, this terrorist group acted directly against Iraqi citizens. After Iraq's defeat in the Second Persian Gulf War, as fresh mercenary forces for Saddam, they launched large-scale and artillery attacks on people and destroying their homes, but also arresting citizens and handing them over the security forces was part of the crimes at the point in time. The respectable officials of the Kurdistan region undoubtedly remember those days and the statements and the words of various personalities, such as the late Mohammad Javad about this crimes and the role of the MEK. The Kurdistan region of Iraq, after years of those crimes and several years after the expulsion of this terrorist group from Iraq, is still stained with the blood of martyrs and victims who were killed by this group. It should not be forgotten that in addition to these crimes, when the Iraqi people in the north and south experienced unstable economic conditions after Saddam's attacks on Kuwait, of oil per day from Saddam. It received money for money laundering and helping the Ba'athist Party regime. The properties that all belonged to the people of Iraq were donated by a dictator to a terrorist group. Unfortunately, after the process of expulsion from Iraq in 2013, at its end, the issues of MEK's crimes against the Iraqi people was not taken into consideration. There is a serious need to pursue the rights of the victims of the assassination carried out by the MEK in Iraq, especially in the Kurdistan region. Their crimes should not be forgotten due to the departure of this terrorist group from Iraq or political consideration. There are numerous and reliable documents about the crimes of this hated terrorist group, and by working together, good results can be obtained for the benefit of justice and the victims. I believe that it is the families of the victims who should be the initiators of this movement, and the duty of governments in such movement should be to facilitate these actions and processes. The Habilian Foundation, as the representative of the Iranians victims' family, is ready to launch a legal campaign against the terrorist group of the Mujahideen Kurds in domestic and international courts within the framework of fraternity and solidarity with the Iraqi people and the people of Kurdistan, both of whom have felt the bitter taste of terrorism and savagery of Saddam's mercenaries. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks to Dr. Hashminejad, the Secretary General of Habilian Foundation, for his valuable speech. Our next speaker is Mr. Yaqub Meraji, a separated member of the MEK and one of the eyewitnesses of the killing of the Kurds by the terrorist group of MEK in Operation Morvarid from France, who provided pure and valuable information about genocide and many crimes committed by the MEK in the Kurdish area of Iraqi Kurdistan. So we invite you to pay attention to his speech.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. سلام و عرض و ادب و احترام خدمت همه دوستان و با تشکر ویژه از TerrorSpring که این فرصت رو در اختیار این حقیر قرار داد تا شمه‌ای از جنایات سازمان تروریستی منافقین علیه کردهای عراق به خصوص علیه گروه طالبانی رو که خود این حقیر هم شاهد و هم ناظر و هم شرکت کننده در این عملیات موسوم به مروارید 1 و 2 بود خدمتون ارائه بدم. در خلال اولین جنگ خلیج فارس که فقط نیروهای ائتلاف تمرکزشون روی حملات هوایی بود و سازمان تروریستی منافقین که در پادگان اشرف در حد فاصل سرزمین‌های کردی و سنی استان دیاری قرار داشت، به نظرم کاملا مصون بود و با توجه به هماهنگی‌هایی که از قبل شده بود هواپیماهای ائتلاف این مناطق رو بمباران نمی‌کردن، یعنی صرفاً به طور ویژه پادگان اشرف رو که قطعاً در مشخصات جغرافیایی اونها ثبت شده بود به عنوان یک سازمان تروریستی و حالا همپیمان با صدام و هماهنگی‌های دیگه، هیچ وقت تحت بمباران در جنگ اول خلیج فارس قرار نداشت. به هر حال طی یک اطلاعیه‌ای با شعبده و زیرکی مسعود رجوی ملعون خائن اطلاعی صادر شد که سازمان در ارتش آزادی بخش به اصطلاح تحت حملات ممکنه قرار بگیره و بنابراین بهتره که پادگان رو ترک بکنیم و به مناطق کوهستانی یا نیمه کوهستانی که در 40 کیلومتری این پادگان قرار داشت به عنوان منطقه تحت عنوان منطقه کفری که زمین مانور و تمرینات نظامی این سازمان بود. به اونجا رفتیم و با کندن سنگر و تجهیزات دیگه یک نیمه پادگان صحرایی رو ایجاد کردیم. بعد از چند مدتی که زندگی سنگری رو همراه با تمرین ها و مانورهای نظامی انجام میدادیم، یک شبی فرمانده اون یگانی که بنده در شرکت داشتم، فرمانده های در واقع فرمانده از پایین ترین رسته که فرمانده دسته میشد، که این بندم در فرمانده دسته بودم اون زمان به عنوان عضو اصلی سازمان تروریستی منافقین، فرا خوندن و صدا کردن در یک سنگر بزرگتری و اطلاعیه اون ملعون مسعود رجوی رو خوندن که با بسم الله قاسم الجبارین شروع کرده بود و بعدم مزخرفاتی که مرسوم بود توی این اطلاعیه اومده بود و خلاصه اعلام آماده باش جنگی کردند که بعدها ما فهمیدیم این بعد از البته انجام عملیات که مروارید 1 و 2 نام داشت. به هر حال یگانها آماده شدن. بنده که اون زمان راننده تانک و فرمانده تانک بودم، ضمن فرماندهی یگان اون یگان که در واقع کاملا مکانیزه بود در تانک ما مستقر بود. من به همراه یک تیربارچی، یک نفر توپچی و خود فرماندهی تانک اون زمان، فرماندهی یگان که فردی بود به نام سعید چاوشی که بعدها در طی عملیاتی به هلاکت رسید. خلاصه تمام این تجهیزات مکانیزه و ادوات سبک و سنگین اهدایی صدام حسین بود. طبیعی بودم که طی توافقی که صدام با مسعود رجوی و دیگر سران سازمان انجام داده بودند، قرار بر این بود که امنیت مناطق کردی به سازمان تروریستی منافقین واگذار بشه که همین مسئولیت رو هم به خوبی انجام دادن. خلاص عملیات شروع شد به عنوان مروارید که بعدها ما فهمیدیم البته مروارید هست و پیشروی به سمت مناطق جلولا و کلار شروع شد. خب میگم بنده که مسئولیت رانندگی تانک رو بر عهده داشتم، نه یک تیری شلیک کردم چون امکانش نبود، نه دستم به خون هیچ بیگناهی آلوده بود. اینو به مقدسات و بالاترین مقدسات هم که خود پروردگار هست ناظر و شاهد سوگند میخورم که دستم به هیچ خونی آلوده نشده بود. اما از دریچه های تانک قسمت راننده، دریچه های مقابل و دریچه های سمت چپ هم بود که مشاهده میکردم چگونه این سازمان تروریستی نه تنها جنایت رو در حق مردم ما در ایران روا داشته و دارد، مناطق افراد کردنشین رو هم، افراد کرد رو در مناطق کردنشین چگونه بیرحمانه به هلاکت میکشت. و این رو دقیق یادم هست. از دریچه نگاه میکردم این بندگان خدایی که هم بالاخره ادوات سنگین تانک در مقابل یک نفر پیاده و با یک کلاشینکوف به دست چجوری میتونست دووم بیاره. بیرحمانه ترین شیوه ها رو به کار بردند و میگم چون اون مناطق تحت نظارت و کنترل افراد طالبانی بود و از اونجایی که یک دشمنی دیرینه‌ای بین افراد طالبانی یعنی مثلا زیاد خوب جمهوری اسلامی تعداد 30 تا اتوبوس آورده که ما رو دستگیر بکنه بدون مثلا شلیک و بدون درگیری دستگیر بکنه ببره، که بعدها مشخص شد که کاملا واهی و دروغ و خیال تفکرات خیال بافانه خود مسعود رجوی بود که ما رو آماده به جنگ بکنه با در مناطق کردنشین، که هم حساب قبلیش رو با یکتی طالبانی تصویه بکنه و هم به همین منظور تأمین امنیت مناطق کردنشین رو که مسئولیتش رو صدام حسین در عهده همین سازمان قرار داده بود به نحو احسن انجام بده و موفق شد به این کار. کما اینکه در همون دوتا عملیات رشته عملیات مروارید 1 و 2 خب کلی از مناطق رو آزاد کردن به قول خودشون و خاطرم هست طی همین عملیات از اونجایی که عدم هماهنگی خب مشخص بود، ما که نظامی نبودیم که به عنوان حالا تحت آموزش‌های خود نیروهای صدام حسین آموزش گرفته بودیم. من راننده تانک شدن رو از یک افسر عراقی آموزش گرفتم، بقیه‌مون هم به همین ترتیب، تا جایی که به هر حال نه خبره نظامی بودیم نه کارآمد بودیم نه چیزی، به هر حال راه افتادیم در همین تو تانک ما فهم کردیم امنیت کامل برقرار و در حین این درگیری‌ها بود هولوش ساعت 11 صبح که دیدیم از روبروی، چون من داشتم از دریچه نگاه می‌کردم، دیدم از روبروی ما تانک‌ها دارن به سمت ما میان و شلیک میکنن. خب اونم یه هماهنگی کرد و تماس گرفت، چیزایی تا آخرین گلوله جنگیدن که همش فکر نمی‌کنم بیشتر از اینم بود. در نتیجه میگم تانک و ادوات سنگین زرهی در مقابل نفرات پیاده دشمن مشخصه که جنگ به نفع این ملعون مسعود رجوی تموم شده بود. به هر حال خواستم شمه‌ای از این جنایت‌های که این سازمان در حق مردم کرد به خصوص مناطق کردنشین تحت جلال طالبانی بر ما مجاهدین مباح هست، یعنی هر کس میتونه خونش رو خون جلال طالبانی رو بریزه. در نتیجه مشاهدات خودم رو طی همین ویدیو
همون نیستیم آخه الان محمدن رسول الله. هم دشمن و متحدینش داخل ایران یا خارج ایران یکی و فقط یکی سلاح علیه ما داشتن، البته سلاح نامشروع و فرسوده. اینا رفتن عراق.
فرماندهان تیپ‌های رزمی و پشتیبانی، فرماندهان توپخانه و زرهی و مهندسی، معاونین عملیاتی تیپ‌های رزمی، فرماندهان گردان‌ها و خطاب به کلیه رزمندشیران مجاهد خلق و ارتش آزادی بخش ملی: آتش به پیش! آتش به پیش! آتش به پیش!
12 فروردین هر سال در تقویم مقاومت ایران یادآور عملیات مروارید ارتش آزادی بخش ملی ایران در سال 1370.
این سالمون بود در نشست با این مسئولایی که ما داشتیم که ما این وسط چیکاریم.
مسعود رجوی که احتمال میداد نتواند همه نیروهایش را در حمایت از صدام و کشتار مردم عراق توجیه کند، به نیروهایش گفت به جنگ نیروهای سپاه ایران می رویم که برای تسخیر اردوگاه اشرف با لباسهای کردی وارد عراق شدند.
ما اخطار کرده بودیم، تاریخ‌ها و اسنادش هم هست، که اگر کسی از این ارتفاعات به ما شلیک کنه یا راه ببنده بهش جداً پاسخ خواهیم داد و دادیم. البته معلوم بود که به رژیم گفتند و رژیم دیگه اومده بود.
اول اومد پوش قضیه رو برای ما توجیه کرد. آقا ایران قرار حمله کنه، با نمیدونم چند تا اتوبوس نیرو آورده لب مرز، قرار بیان اشرف رو بگیرن.
سازمان مدعی بود که ایران تحت پوش کردها داره به ما حمله میکنه
و ما برای دفاع از اشرف باید جلوشون بگیریم. این چیزی بود که ما گفتن و به همین دلیل هم بعدها ذهنها رو استوب زدن به دخالت در جنگی که ربطی نداشت.
ما داریم از اشرف دفاع میکنیم، در صورتی که همان سوال بود براشون که هنوز هیچ که به اشرف حمله نکرده، مورد تعرض قرار نگرفته. چطوری ما داریم دفاع میکنیم از اشرف در صورتی که ما کیلومترها داریم با سلاح و تانک زرهی داریم وارد مرز ایران داریم میشیم.
بعد به ما گفته بود که آره اینا کرد نیستن، اینا همشون زیر لباسشون نمیدونم لباس سپاه پاسداران تو زیرش و اینا اسم فقط روشون لباس کردی هست و با این معمل که مثلا منطقه سلیمان بک رو بست، ورودی کرکوک بود، کفری رو بست، منطقه بقوه رو بست، سمت خانقه می اومدن. یعنی کلا 3 جناحی که با محمل اینکه قرار اینا بیان اشرف رو بگیرن، اینا اصلا به اشرف اصلا کاری نداشتن. قرار بود کرده بودن که قرار بودن حکومت سرنگون کنن، بیان بغداد رو بگیرن. یعنی عملا رجبی یک جوره حیاتش رو برای صدام.
در جریان سلسله عملیات مروارید 40 تن از رزمندگان مجاهد خلق پس از نبردی جانانه با مزدوران خمینی به شهادت رسیدند و به دیدار رفیق اعلی شتافتند.
در حالی که کردها برای جلوگیری از جنگ در 2 جبهه قصد درگیری با نیروهای سازمان مجاهدین خلق را نداشتند و تلاش می‌کردند با اعضای سازمان مذاکره کنند، نیروهای سازمان با تانک و نفربر وارد شهر کفری شدند و زن، کودک، پیر و جوان را هدف گلوله قرار دادند.
الان هم هر غلط که کردید باشه، اون همه شما زمین دارین دیگه، سلیمانیه، اربیل، دهوک، زاخو، این همه زمین داری، رو موج هم سوار شده اومدی دیگه. امریکا زده ارتش عراق رو، شما بلند شده اومدی دیگه، خودت که کاری نکردی.
سازمان مجاهدین خلق به پشتوانه توپخانه بعثی‌ها مناطق کرد نشین را به توپ می‌بست و مردم را زیر آوارها می‌کرد. آنچه از این عملیات‌ها باقی می‌ماند مرگ هزاران زن و کودک زیر آواره به جا مانده و ویرانی مناطق کرد نشین بود. همکاری سازمان مجاهدین خلق با صدام مانع پیشروی کردها شد و باعث شد نیروهای ارتش صدام از جبهه جنوب فرا رسیده و با استفاده از هلیکوپتر و توپخانه کردهای عراق را سرکوب کنند. این همکاری به انتفاضه شعبانی معروف شد. سازمان مجاهدین خلق پس از خروج از لیست تروریستی آمریکا به صرف میلیون‌ها دلار پول نفت عراق که در زمان صدام به آنها هدیه داده شده بود و کمک‌های مالی گسترده کشورهای غربی به برگزاری مراسماتی در اروپا روی آورد. این مراسمات با حضور اغلب سیاستمداران بازنشسته اروپایی و آمریکایی برگزار می‌شد. سیاستمدارانی که برای شرکت و سخنرانی در این مراسمات حدود 20,000 دلار دریافت می‌کردند تا از حضور سازمان مجاهدین خلق در عراق دفاع کنند. مجاهدین خلق پس از چند دهه ترور سیاستمداران ایرانی به حرکات سیاسی روی آوردند.
ببین با سقوط صدام از نظر من مسعود رجبی هم سقوط کرد. یعنی حیات فیزیکیش اصلا مهم نیست دیگه. این فرد به لحاظ سیاسی، بین المللی، اجتماعی، هر چی که بگین، با صدام حسین دفن شد. حالا مونده یک سازمانی که مثلا تحت رهبری مریم. خب این سازمان الان خاصیتی نداره، کاری هم ازش بر نمیاد. تنها خاصیتش اینه که ابزار تبلیغی در دست غرب باشه. به چه شکل؟ مثلا بحران هسته‌ای بیاد از طریق این شروع بشه، مثلا اینا بیان اول مطرح کنن. یعنی قشنگ دیکته میکنه، این میگه خواست اونا رو. یعنی اگر کوچکترین زاویه‌ای بین مسعود رجبی و نتانیاهو پیدا کردیم به من نشون.
Okay, we thank Mr. Yaqub Miraji for his valuable speech, which undoubtedly provided us with valuable information about the crimes of the terrorist group of the MEK in the massacre of Iraqi Kurds, and we hope that the information of the eyewitness. We have Mr. Daniel Ferrari, journalist and analyst of geopolitical issues from Italy, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you.
First important event. I was asked to speak about the role of MEK, Mujahideen Khalq, in Iraq, especially in the repression and the ethnic cleansing operations of Saddam regime during the 80s and the 90s. The topic, of course, is very interesting for me and very important, especially because paradoxically MEK is gaining new audience in the West and also in Italy, in my country, thanks to the work of the pro-American party Fratelli d'Italia. This name means literally Brothers of Italy. Some of the members of this party, following the ideas of Giulio Terzi, which is the most prominent MEK supporter in Italy, even proposed to put the Revolutionary Guards of Iran in the list of terrorist organizations, forgetting the role they played in defending Christian communities in Syria and Iraq. Well, let me start giving a short introduction about what MEK really is, because this organization has a long and complex history. As the audience probably already know, MEK was born in 1965, September 1965 to be specific, and in the beginning had some kind of Marxist roots, even if mixed with some sort of deviated Islamic ideas. After the revolution, Imam Khomeini started to see this group as a serious threat for the life of the Islamic Republic. Today, we know that he was absolutely right, but in 1981, when MEK was excluded from Iran, the things were not so clear like now. After 1981, MEK political leaders found asylum first in Paris, where they tried to find Western consent for their cause, founding the so-called National Council of Resistance of Iran, a creation of Masoud Rajavi and Abul Hassan Bani Sadr. And after 1986, they found asylum in Iraq, under the regime of Saddam. In this regard, it is important to underline the fact that they were expelled from France in 1985 or 1986 because the Islamic Republic of Iran played an important role in fostering the release of some French hostages held in Lebanon. Anyway, in the 80s, we have the first shift in MEK ideology. What was this first shift? In order to find consent in the West, MEK leaders tried to present the movement as a pro-democracy, pro-human rights, pro-free market, and the champion of Kurdish autonomy, and so on. With the arrival in Iraq, where Saddam provided military and financial assistance for the group, we have another shift. From that period, the only leader of the organization became Masoud Rajavi. After the marriage with Mariam Azodanlu, former wife of one of his close collaborators, Rajavi, which was previously married with the daughter of Bani Sadr, started to speak about a new ideological revolution, focused on the rights of women and equality among men and women. Another way that another way, let's say, to get some Western attention, of course. But he and his wife became the two faces of MEK, and they transformed MEK in what it is now. Now, MEK is a sort of a personal cult. Let's not forget that Rajavi even compared his marriage with the one of the Prophet Muhammad. And he even chose for himself the title of Imam of the Present. At the same time, MEK fought on the side of Iraq in the war that Saddam regime launched against the Islamic Republic with the support of Saudi Arabia and some Western countries. In 1988, Rajavi launched the so-called Operation Eternal Light, a real attempt of invading Iran with the whole MEK army. Rajavi used to hope in the support of Iranian people in order to overthrow the Islamic Republic. Of course, there was no support at all, and the operation ended up in a complete disaster for Rajavi and MEK. But Rajavi, instead of recognizing his failure, pointed his finger against his militants, most of them, by the way, forced to fight against their own country and kept captives in MEK camps in Iraq. And in this regard, it is important to say that the Rajavis, even nowadays in Albania, force their militants inside the camps, taking their documents, brainwashing their minds, and with the excuse that they don't have anywhere else to go. Jail or torture if they leave from the camp, death penalty if they try to come back in Iran. But again, in this regard, we should not forget that Iran proposed amnesty for all MEK members, with the exception of its leaders. Anyway, after the disaster of 1988, the rules of MEK became even more strict. Gender segregation, cut off of communication with the families, forced divorce, and so on. Love for family, friends and wife has been replaced, let's say, in MEK new ideology, by love for the Rajavis, for the couple which is a leader of MEK, Mariam and Masoud. Masoud that has been missing from 2003, when after the second aggression of the West against Iraq. Finally, in 1991, after the first aggression of the West against Saddam Hussein, we know that MEK helped the regime to brutally suppress mainly Shia and Kurdish people. MEK nowadays denies this accusation, but it is well known its role in the famous sentence of Rajavi: "Take the Kurds under your tanks and save the bullets for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards." Something that it is quite ironic if we think that this sentence came from a movement that tried to present itself as a champion of Kurdish autonomy in Iran, as I said before. In conclusion, I must say that unfortunately the real history of MEK is not well known in the West. Nobody knows, or they pretend that they don't know, that the MEK owns a financial empire: stocks, properties, nightclubs, casinos. Nobody knows that MEK plays an ambiguous, more than an ambiguous role in financing political parties in Europe, the Spanish party Vox, for example, that MEK plays an ambiguous role in lobbying in the American Congress that plays an ambiguous role in human trafficking and drug trafficking and so on. This is actually its real power, money and some important Western friends. Money, of course, made with fraud, something that even the American authorities have recognized. MEK, for instance, is often behind most of the donation campaigns for the respect of the human rights in Iran, something that allows them to have a Western audience, of course, as I said before again. And it is again ironic if we consider that they don't have any respect for human rights in the reality. MEK members, as I said before, are brainwashed. Prisoners recruited among Iranian immigrants in the Gulf monarchies or in Turkey. People kept captive with the false promises of good employment or paid asylum in Western countries. A final consideration, because in 2003, after the start of the operation, the so-called Operation Iraqi Freedom, the Islamic Republic of Iran proposed a prisoner exchange with the US, MEK members for Al-Qaeda members, detained in Iran. The US, of course, refused because they already knew, that they could use MEK members to reach their geopolitical goal to destabilize internally Iran, or at least to try to do so. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks to Mr. Daniel Perla for his valuable speech, and we hope that this conference can take an effective step to inform the people and especially Italian politicians about the terrorist group of the MEK. The next speaker for today's conference is Dr. Robert Fontina, university professor, writer and journalist from Canada, and we invite you to pay attention to his speech. Thank you.
Hello. The terrorist organization known in English as the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, and alternatively by the initials MEK or MKO, has a long and ugly history. For years it was even designated a terrorist organization by the United States and other countries, until the US decided that Iran was its mortal enemy and needed to be destroyed. Now it is financially supported by these countries. It seems ironic that an organization that refers to itself as a people's organization has so little support in the nation it purports to assist. Within Iran, the MEK is seen for what it is, an anti-government terrorist organization. Its many horrific crimes against the people of Iran and other people have been clearly documented. Today, I'm only going to discuss its role in the 1991 slaughter of Iraqi Kurds. Following the Gulf War, the United States wanted regime change in Iraq. This is U.S. speak for toppling a nation's leader, whether a cruel tyrant or, as is more likely the case when the U.S. wants regime change, a democratically elected leader who seeks to assist the people of the nation to which he or she has been elected, but has political leanings too far to the left to please the mighty U.S. At this point, immediately after the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein seemed vulnerable, and Kurdish groups wanted to seize this opportunity. They had long suffered under his rule, and seeing vulnerability, sought to take advantage of it. During the 1980s, it's estimated that 182,000 Kurds disappeared during what was known as the Anfal operation. The goal of this was to depopulate the Kurdish countryside. This is genocide. The U.S. President at the time of the Gulf War, George H.W. Bush, encouraged revolution in Iraq and spoke to Iraqis via the so-called Voice of America broadcasting system. He said that the military could stop the bloodshed by forcing Saddam out, and then Iraq could comply with United Nations resolutions and, as he put it, quote, rejoin the family of peace-loving nations, close quote. I will digress for a moment to point out the sheer hypocrisy of these statements. The U.S. government was encouraging the overthrow of another government. It was then saying that Iraq could comply with UN resolutions, something the U.S. has never required of its close ally, the apartheid Zionist entity. And the U.S., which has been at war for all but a few years of its entire existence, is hardly a peace-loving nation. The MEK was anxious to put down a revolt in a nation that was hosting them, following their expulsion from Iran. According to a 1992 report from Human Rights Watch, quote, testimony collected was persuasive that the MKO and foreign mercenaries helped Iraqi soldiers to crush the uprising, close quote. The report says that it wasn't possible to assess the importance of the MEK's role, and that of other groups, but there is sufficient information to indicate that the MEK's role was significant. The Kurds took control of Mosul and Sulaymaniyah and continued to advance. Stopping them if they grew close to Baghdad would have been difficult, and this is where the MEK or MKO intervened. Their forces entered Kirkuk and assisted in the recapturing of that city by Ba'athist government forces. The same report from Human Rights Watch discussed the people reported missing as a result of this uprising. The report reads in part as follows, quote, also missing to this day are an unknown number of Kurdish men who are among several thousand rounded up from Kurdish neighborhoods of Kirkuk days before the outbreak of the uprising. While most of those were arrested within 5 weeks, some have never reappeared. Baghdad refused to comment on their fate when the matter was raised by the Kurdish leadership during negotiations with Baghdad, Kurdish political sources said. Close quote. Further in the Human Rights Watch report, it says this, quote, the post-uprising roundups were particularly sweeping in the holy cities of Karbala and Al-Najaf. Those taken include hundreds of clerics. Between March 19th and 23rd of 1991, authorities in Al-Najaf arrested the 95-year-old Shia spiritual leader, Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Abu al-Qassam al-Khoi, and 105 persons from his family and his associates and their families. The so-called leaders of the MKO are Mossad and Maryam Rajavi. Mossad Rajavi has not been seen in 20 years, and Maryam Rajavi is now the face of this terrorist organization. After the 1991 uprising, Mossad Rajavi is quoted as saying the following, quote, the Iraqi Kurds were our longtime enemy. In this operation, we had strategic unity and common interests with the landlord, and we saved the landlord being Saddam Hussein. Maryam Rajavi demonstrated the brutality for which she is known. She said, quote, I had previously told you that these people did not deserve to be shot, and put them under the tank, and keep the bullets for the guards. Close quote. Additional documentation quotes Commander Majid Al-Amain. Quote, the locals got killed with the forces surrounded by the armored and mechanized units of the First Axis, and gathered in the heights of the Jebadah. We buried them with a loader. One of them was alive and was blown up several times by a person named Ghalam Nabi with a loader nail and hit the ground to be killed. This is the hatred of Maryam's fighters against the Iraqi Kurds. Close quote. What was the toll on the Kurdish people? A year after the uprising, Human Rights Watch reported a death toll of at least 200,000. Additionally, over 180,000 Kurds and Shia who fled their homes remained displaced internally a year later, and another 70,000 were in foreign refugee camps. Today, Kurdistan is a semi-autonomous region of Iraq, where its residents deal with the fallout of the U.S.-backed unrest in Syria, Israeli hostility toward Iran, which includes occasional bombings, and the constant threat of an Israeli or U.S. invasion of Iran, geopolitical tensions over Middle East oil supplies, and the general U.S.-caused destabilization of the entire Middle East. The MEK, with a long history of terror against the people of Iran and its allies, although small in numbers, continues to be a terrorist threat in the area, due largely to U.S. support. It is able to continue to function with an aging membership due to that support. The U.S. has never understood, in terms of Iran, Palestine, Vietnam, and countries around the world, how these populations do not want to live under the rule of a cruel U.S. puppet, but want, like all peoples, to determine for themselves the government under which they will live. Because of this, the U.S. has supported anti-government terrorists in Nicaragua, Chile, Syria, and many other countries. Overthrew the democratically elected governments of Iran in 1953, Chile in 1971, again among many others, and has invaded countless countries, including Vietnam, Iraq, Libya, and others. Its support for another terrorist organization, the MEK, is not surprising, since the U.S. has no regard for human rights within its own borders or anywhere else on the planet. As a result, it is likely that suffering will continue in many parts of the world, and terrorists such as the MEK will continue to function with U.S. financial and diplomatic support. This is a tragedy for the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are very grateful for the valuable speech of Dr. Robert Fontina from Canada here on the second day of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. We hope that this conference can take an effective step in revealing the terrorist group of the MEK to the people of the world, and the information presented in this conference can be used as evidence in international courts against the terrorist group of the MEK. And I feel it is necessary to express my gratitude and appreciation on behalf of the TerrorSpring Institute for the speakers and the participants in this international conference. Here I invite all dear ones to pay attention to the final statement of the Crime Against Humanity Conference, Genocide of Iraqi Kurds by the MEK. Thank you so much.
Hello again, dear audiences, and thank you one more time for being with us at this conference of Genocide and Crimes Against Humanity, the Masculine and Genocide of the Kurds, the Iraqi Kurds by the Mujahideen Khalq. I mentioned earlier about the crimes that the Mujahideen Khalq has committed against humanity and against people of the world, from Iranian and Iraqi Kurds to even European and American people. Once again, we're back here with other documents and other documented evidence against this group and about the crimes that the group has committed throughout its history of 4 or 5 decades. It is interesting to know that the MEK was referred to as a terrorist group based on the CIA report that we have, and that it has assassinated several American advisors, at least 6 American advisors, based on this document. The RAND report also pointed out to that, and this is one other document of the American intelligence services mentioning the assassination of Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Hawkins and the assassination of other army officers, Colonel Paul Schaefer, Jack Turner, Robert Krongrad, William C. Cottrell, and Donald G. Smith. The FBI also released a report from 2004 that explicitly calls the Mujahideen Khalq a terrorist organization. In several sections of this FBI report, the terrorist nature of the Mujahideen Khalq and Masoud Rajavi is explicitly stated. Interestingly, this report mentions the assassination of several American citizens and officers and advisors that we mentioned earlier in CIA and RAND report. This FBI report also says that the Mujahideen Khalq attacked at least 12 Iranian diplomatic centers abroad and assassinated several other innocent people. A part of this FBI report, under the title of Mujahideen Khalq Criminal Investigation, also says that the investigation in Los Angeles uncovered a fraud scheme by the MEK
in which they utilized a charity organization known as the Committee for Human Rights to provide a front for their fundraising for the NLA, or National Liberation Army. Well, based on the FBI report, this was referred to as a fraud and as an act of fundraising for a terrorist group and terrorist operation, and it resulted in the arrest of at least 165 MEK members and supporters. The report clearly states that the Mujahideen-e-Khalq was designated as a terrorist organization by the United States Department of State, and it emphasizes that the MEK still engages in acts of terrorism as a means of reaching their goal. The FBI also reports that the NLA, or the National Liberation Army, the operational and military branch of the MEK, was used as Saddam's private army, and it aided and abetted Saddam in committing its crimes. A journalist named Aaron Sands also reports about the chemical weapons being stored at NLA bases. In fact, Saddam, who pretended to shelter the Mujahideen-e-Khalq for humanitarian reasons, used them and exploited them for his own heinous crimes and purposes. Also, the FBI and the Australian AFP conducted a joint investigation on the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, and they discovered that funds were moved between the two of the members of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq and then to a complex web of MEK money laundering in Europe. The black history and the barbaric crimes of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq against its own members and against the Iraqi Kurds and Iranians and Americans and people of the world is not limited in what we just went through in RAND and FBI and CIA's reports. So many other news outlets and so many other documents point out to these crimes. The New York Times also has a report titled "Highly Secretive Iranian Rebels Are Holed Up in Albania." They gave us a tour. This report states that they are banned from most of the necessary things that they are in need of. And there are self-criticism rituals where they confess to whatever even they have thought about, and thinking about sexual issues there in the terrorist cult of the Rajavis is a crime. The Guardian also reports on this terrorist group. The report under the title of "Terrorists, Cultists, or Champions of Iranian Democracy, the Wild History of the MEK," clearly mentions some of the crimes they have committed, some of the violations of human rights that the MEK has committed, and what it is imposing upon its own members. The group is also referred to as an Islamic Marxist militia in this report, and it says that it has a combination of Islamism with Marxism doctrine. This was, of course, a fraction of what we can say and what we can tell about the crimes of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, and the rest of it is, I hope, well, soon to be told. at our next conferences. Thank you for being with us. We would like to thank the cultivated professors, elites, and scholars who have come to fulfill the rights of the oppressed people, and those who have inscribed some of the most heinous crimes in history committed by the anti-human terror group of the Mujahideen Khalq, in the hope that no injustice will be committed against humanity in any part of the world. Cruelty is the key word of the Kurds, whose cries have been suffocated by the oppression of Saddam and his mercenaries, the Mujahideen Khalq. The Kurds, the oppressed people who, thanks to their loyalty, courage, and honor, have been a great example of oppressed heroes. Those whose history has no record of unfaithfulness, and books have been written about their oppression. From plains of Kifri and the mountains of Oramanat to Kanakan, from Kanimango to Tuzkormatu, it is all a testimony of the people whom the world has chosen to be silent in the face of their oppression. Today we have gathered here with the effort of the TerrorSpring Institute and with the support of these elites to bring to the attention of the world community some of the atrocities that this brave nation has endured for many years. Now we are here to invite international human rights organizations and international and legal forums to prosecute the terrorist group of the Mujahideen Khalq by creating fact-finding groups. The Mujahideen Khalq, a group with half a dozen of names and aliases to hide under. Those who have protected themselves from the judgment of legal circles for many years by pretending to be the oppressed. We are here to fight for the rights of the oppressed people who have been victims of the crimes of the Mujahideen Khalq terrorist group. Our efforts in the way of fulfilling these rights will not end, and we will continue until the execution of justice for the terrorists of the Mujahideen Khalq.